My millionaire husband never touched me, but that night in the kitchen changed our marriage. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew the cameras were watching, but she smiled anyway. Ingrid Samuels stood perfectly still as the photographer adjusted his lens for the 15th time. The charity gala's backdrop shimmered behind her, gold and ivory, expensive and hollow. Her emerald dress hugged her curves with precision, every fold designed to catch the light just right. But the real masterpiece wasn't the dress. It was the lie. "Mrs. Whitaker, could you move a little closer to your husband?" The photographer's voice cut through the buzz of Manhattan's elite mingling around them. Ingrid's smile never wavered as she stepped toward Thorne. 6 inches. Close enough to look intimate, far enough to avoid actual contact. Thorne Whitaker, 38 and devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, placed his hand near her waist, hovering just above the fabric. To everyone watching, it looked like a loving touch. Ingrid felt nothing but air. "Perfect," the photographer beamed. "America's power couple at their finest." Power couple. The words tasted like champagne that had gone flat. They'd been married exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 16 days. Ingrid knew because she counted every single one, not out of love, out of survival. Each day was another performance, another scene in the elaborate play their families had written for them. The Samuels family built their fortune in luxury real estate across the East Coast. The Whitakers owned half of Manhattan's financial district. When their children married, it wasn't romance, it was a merger. "Darling," Thorne's voice was smooth, practiced. He leaned down as if whispering something intimate. Instead, he said, "The Hendersons are at 3 o'clock. We should make an appearance." Ingrid tilted her head up toward him, her dark eyes sparkling under the chandeliers. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman hearing sweet nothings from her devoted husband. "Of course," she whispered back, her voice carrying just enough warmth to sell the moment. They moved through the crowd like dancers who had rehearsed their steps 1,000 times. Thorne's hand ghosted along her lower back, never quite touching, always almost there. They exchanged pleasantries with investors, smiled at reporters, and played their parts flawlessly. Mrs. Henderson, dripping in diamonds and gossip, cornered them near the champagne fountain. "You two are simply radiant together," she gushed, her eyes hungry for details. "Marriage suits you both so well. And Ingrid, darling, you're absolutely glowing. Any exciting news we should know about?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ingrid felt Thorne's entire body tense beside her, though his expression remained perfectly neutral. "We're just enjoying being newlyweds," Ingrid replied smoothly, her media training kicking in. "Taking our time to build something beautiful together." Beautiful. Another word that tasted like lies. Mrs. Henderson's eyes gleamed. "Well, when the time comes, your children will be absolutely gorgeous. Look at you two like something out of a magazine." Thorne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Only Ingrid noticed because she'd learned to read the subtle signs of his discomfort. The way his breathing changed, the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the way he found excuses to step away whenever conversations turned too personal. "Excuse us," Thorne said with practiced charm. "I promised Ingrid a dance." He offered his arm, not his hand, never his hand. They glided onto the dance floor as the orchestra played something slow and romantic. Thorne positioned himself carefully, maintaining the traditional dance hold without their bodies actually touching. His left hand held hers with the lightness of a butterfly landing on a flower. His right hand hovered near her back, close enough to guide her movements, distant enough to maintain the space he seemed to need. They moved together beautifully. From the outside, they looked like lovers lost in each other. From the inside, Ingrid felt like she was dancing with a ghost. "You handled that well," Thorne murmured as they swayed. "I always do." The words came out sharper than she intended. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, regret. But before she could identify it, his mask slipped back into place. The song ended. They separated with the kind of smile that belonged in magazines. More pictures, more compliments, more lies wrapped in silk and designer labels. By the time they arrived home to their penthouse apartment, Ingrid's feet ached and her cheeks hurt from smiling. She kicked off her heels the moment they crossed the threshold, her 5'7" frame finally relaxing. "Good evening," Thorne said formally, loosening his bow tie. "I'll be in my study if you need anything." If you need anything, as if she were a house guest instead of his wife. "Good night, Thorne." He paused at the foot of the grand staircase, his hand resting on the marble banister. For just a second he looked like he wanted to say something else, but the moment passed, and he disappeared upstairs to his wing of the apartment. Ingrid stood alone in their palatial living room, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people's cars and artwork that belonged in museums. Everything was perfect. Everything was cold. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. The city sparkled below her like scattered diamonds, beautiful and untouchable, just like her marriage. In the reflection of the glass, she saw herself, still elegant, still poised, but tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She was 30 years old, successful, intelligent, and stunning. She had everything a woman was supposed to want, so why did she feel so invisible? The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight. Another day of pretending was over. Tomorrow would bring more events, more photos, more perfectly practiced moments of fake intimacy. Ingrid touched her own face, tracing the line of her cheek. When was the last time someone had touched her with genuine affection? When was the last time she'd felt truly seen? She picked up her heels and headed toward her bedroom, the master suite that she occupied alone, while Thorne slept in the guest wing. As she climbed the stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living someone else's life. But as she reached the top landing, she heard something unexpected, the soft sound of piano music drifting from somewhere downstairs. Ingrid froze, her hand gripping the banister. In all their months of marriage, she had never heard Thorne play piano. She didn't even know they owned one. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, sad and hopeful at the same time. It spoke of longing, of things left unsaid, of hearts that beat in parallel but never quite together. For the first time since their wedding day, Ingrid wondered if her husband might be just as lonely as she was, and that thought changed everything. What would you do if you were married to someone who treated you like a beautiful stranger? Would you stay and fight for love? Or would you walk away from a golden cage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt invisible in a relationship that looked perfect from the outside? The piano music pulled her down the stairs like an invisible thread. Ingrid moved carefully, her bare feet silent against the cold marble. She'd left her heels upstairs, along with the evening's pretenses. For the first time in months, she wasn't performing for anyone. The melody grew stronger as she descended, achingly beautiful notes that seemed to carry years of unspoken words. She'd never heard Thorne mention music, never seen sheet music in their pristine home, never even noticed a piano among their carefully curated furniture. Yet someone was playing, and playing magnificently. She followed the sound through the main corridor, past the dining room where they ate their silent breakfasts, past the living room where they entertained guests with rehearsed conversations. The music led her to a door she'd never opened, one she'd assumed was another storage closet in their maze of unnecessary rooms. But as she pressed her ear against the dark wood, she realized the sound was coming from beyond this door. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned the handle. The room that opened before her took her breath away. It was a music room, not the sterile, decorator-designed spaces that filled the rest of their home, but something alive and personal. A grand piano dominated the center, its ebony surface worn smooth by countless hours of practice. Sheet music scattered across a side table told stories of late-night sessions and forgotten meals. A half-empty coffee mug sat abandoned on the windowsill, still warm, and there, at the piano bench, sat her husband. But this wasn't the Thorne she knew from boardrooms and galas. This man had shed his armor along with his tuxedo jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms she'd never really noticed before. His dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. His fingers moved across the keys with a tenderness she'd never seen him show anything or anyone. Ingrid held her breath, afraid that any sound would shatter this moment. For the first time since their wedding, she was seeing the real Thorne Whitaker. Not the businessman, not the perfect husband, just him. The piece he played was complex, full of longing and melancholy. His eyes were closed, his entire being focused on the music flowing from his fingertips. There was something almost sacred about the way he touched those keys. Gentle, reverent, completely absorbed. She thought about all the times he'd avoided touching her, the careful distances he maintained, the way he flinched almost imperceptibly when she accidentally brushed against him at events. She'd assumed it was rejection, coldness, maybe even disgust. But watching him now, she wondered if she'd been wrong about everything. The music reached a crescendo, and Thorne's shoulders tensed with the emotional weight of the piece. When the final notes faded into silence, he remained perfectly still, his hands resting on the keys as if he couldn't bear to break the connection. "I didn't know you played." The words slipped out before Ingrid could stop them. Thorn's entire body went rigid. His hands jerked away from the piano as if the keys had suddenly become burning coals. When he turned toward her, his face had already begun rebuilding its familiar walls. "Ingrid," her name sounded like an apology. "I didn't realize you were still awake." "The music." She stepped into the room, her eyes taking in details she'd missed from the doorway. "It's beautiful. You're incredibly talented." Something flickered across his expression, surprise, maybe even pleasure, before the mask slipped back into place. "It's just a hobby." He stood abruptly, creating distance between them. "I should let you get your rest." "Wait." The word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. Thorn paused, his body language screaming discomfort, but he didn't leave. Ingrid looked around the room again, really seeing it this time. The music sheets weren't random. They were organized, annotated, loved. A small framed photograph sat on the side table. A young boy at a piano, maybe 8 years old, beaming with pride. The boy looked exactly like Thorn. "How long?" she asked softly. "How long what?" "How long have you been hiding this room from me?" Thorn's jaw tightened. "I wasn't hiding it, you never asked." The words stung because they were true. In their year of marriage, how many conversations had they actually had? How many questions had she asked about his life, his dreams, his fears? They moved through their days like polite strangers, sharing space but never sharing themselves. "You're right," she admitted. "I never asked about anything that mattered." The honesty seemed to surprise him. Some of the tension left his shoulders. "The room came with the apartment," he said finally. "I had the piano moved in about 6 months ago. Why didn't you tell me?" Thorn was quiet for so long that Ingrid thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because it's the only place I can breathe." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Ingrid took a careful step closer, noting how his hands clenched at his sides. "The piece you were playing, what was it called?" "Clair de Lune, Debussy." He paused. "It means moonlight." It sounded like longing. Maybe it was. They stood in silence, the weight of unspoken truths filling the space between them. Ingrid studied her husband's face, searching for clues to the man behind the careful composure. For the first time, she noticed the faint shadows under his eyes, the slight tension around his mouth that spoke of sleepless nights and private struggles. "Thorn," she said gently, "are you happy?" The question seemed to physically pain him. He turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the piano. "Happiness wasn't part of our arrangement. But what if it could be?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment his carefully constructed walls crumbled. She saw exhaustion there, and loneliness that matched her own, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. But before she could identify it, he rebuilt his defenses. "It's late," he said, his voice returning to its formal tone. "We both have early meetings tomorrow." Ingrid nodded, recognizing the dismissal, but as she turned to leave, she paused at the doorway. "Thorn." "Yes." "The next time you play, I'd like to listen, if that's okay." For a long moment he didn't respond. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "I'd like that too." As Ingrid climbed the stairs to her empty bedroom, she carried with her the memory of moonlight music and the startling realization that her husband might be just as trapped in their perfect prison as she was. But more importantly, she carried hope, because sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the places we're afraid to show. The coffee maker's gentle hum was the only sound breaking the morning silence. Ingrid stood at the kitchen island, watching steam rise from her mug like morning prayers. She'd been up since 5:30, replaying every moment from the night before. The music room, the piano, the crack in Thorn's armor that had revealed something achingly human underneath. She'd barely slept, her mind spinning with questions she'd never thought to ask in 14 months of marriage. Who was the boy in that photograph? When had music become his refuge? And why did a man who could create such beautiful melodies live like he was afraid of his own shadow? The grandfather clock chimed 7 times. Thorn would be down soon for his usual routine: black coffee, financial reports, polite small talk about the weather or stock market. Then he'd disappear into his study until evening, and they'd return to their choreographed dance of avoidance. But not today. Today felt different. Footsteps on the marble staircase announced his arrival. Ingrid's pulse quickened, a reaction that surprised her. When had she started caring about her husband's presence? Thorn appeared in the kitchen doorway, perfectly dressed as always. Charcoal suit, silver tie, every hair in place. But Ingrid noticed what she'd missed before. The careful way he paused before entering any room, scanning for escape routes like a man preparing for battle. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying its usual professional courtesy. "Good morning." She turned to face him fully, noting how his steps slowed when he realized she was watching him. "I made extra coffee, thank you." He moved to the coffee station with practiced efficiency, maintaining his usual distance. But something was different. He seemed more aware of her presence, stealing glances when he thought she wasn't looking. Ingrid made a decision that would have terrified her yesterday. "The music last night," she said softly. "How long have you been playing?" Thorne's hand stilled on the coffee pot handle. For a moment she thought he would retreat behind his usual wall of polite deflection. Instead, he surprised her. "Since I was 7. His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught something underneath, a tremor of vulnerability. "My mother insisted on lessons." "The photograph in the music room, that's you, isn't it?" He nodded, pouring his coffee with unnecessary precision. "At my first recital. You looked so happy." "I was." The admission seemed to escape before he could stop it. Music was simpler then. Ingrid set down her mug, studying his profile. "What changed?" Thorne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Life, responsibility, expectations." The words hung between them like smoke, heavy with unspoken history. Ingrid sensed there was more, much more, but pushing too hard would only make him retreat. "I'd still like to listen," she said instead. "If the offer stands." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes that transformed his entire face. "Tonight," he said quietly. "If you'd like. I'd like that, very much." For a moment, they stood in their pristine kitchen, two people who shared a name and an address, but were just beginning to share something real. The morning light streaming through their floor-to-ceiling windows caught the gold flecks in Thorne's dark eyes, and Ingrid realized she'd never really looked at him before. Not like this. The spell broke when Thorne's phone buzzed against the marble counter. Business, always business. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted back to professional mode. "I have a conference call in 10 minutes. "Of course." Ingrid tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Will you be home for dinner?" "I should be, around 7. He paused at the kitchen entrance, his back to her. "Ingrid?" "Yes?" "Thank you for listening last night." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and the echo of genuine gratitude. Ingrid finished her coffee alone, but for the first time in months, alone didn't feel lonely. The day passed differently than usual. Instead of filling her time with charity luncheons and shopping expeditions designed to occupy wealthy wives, Ingrid found herself researching classical music. She discovered Debussy's story, learned about impressionist composers, and listened to different recordings of Clair de Lune until she could hear the subtle differences in interpretation. She also found herself thinking about Thorne in ways she never had before, not as the distant husband she'd been assigned, but as a person with hidden depths and secret passions, a man who poured his emotions into piano keys because he couldn't express them any other way. At 5:30, she made another decision that would have shocked her former self. She ordered ingredients for dinner, not from their usual high-end catering service, but simple, real food that she planned to cook herself. When was the last time she'd cooked for someone? When was the last time she'd wanted to? By 6:45, their dining room smelled like rosemary and garlic. She'd prepared something simple but elegant: herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, a bottle of wine that had been gathering dust in their collection. Nothing too ambitious. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was trying to connect with him. The front door opened at exactly 7 o'clock. "Ingrid?" Thorne's voice carried a note of surprise. "Something smells incredible." She appeared in the foyer, suddenly nervous. "I thought we could eat together tonight. Actually eat, not just occupy the same space." Thorne's eyes widened slightly. In all their months of marriage, they'd never shared a meal that wasn't a business necessity or social obligation. "You cooked?" I remembered how. She smiled, feeling foolish and brave at the same time. "It's nothing fancy, but it smells like home," he said quietly, and something in his voice made her chest tighten. They sat across from each other at their enormous dining table, but somehow the distance felt smaller than usual. The food provided a safe topic of conversation. Ingrid's rusty cooking skills, Thorne's admission that he couldn't boil water without burning it. Small talk, but different, warmer. As they ate, Ingrid noticed things she'd missed before. How Thorn cut his food into precise, small pieces. How he paused between bites as if eating required conscious effort. How he kept his free hand flat on the table, never gesturing or reaching across their shared space. "This is delicious," he said, and meant it. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me for cooking dinner, Thorn. We're married." The words hung in the air, heavier than she'd intended, because they both knew their marriage was nothing like the word implied. Thorn set down his fork carefully. "Are we, though?" The question was so quiet she almost missed it, but the pain underneath was impossible to ignore. "What do you mean?" "We live together. We attend events together. We sleep in the same house." His voice was measured, clinical. "But are we married, Ingrid? Or are we just two people honoring a contract?" The honesty in his voice stole her breath. For the first time since their wedding, he was asking a real question, expecting a real answer. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I'd like to find out." And in that moment everything changed. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Ingrid's confession hung in the air. "I'd like to find out," and she watched Thorn's face transform. For a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped completely, revealing something raw and hopeful and terrified all at once. Then, like a man remembering he was standing too close to a cliff, he pulled back. "Ingrid." He pushed his chair away from the table, creating physical distance to match the emotional space he was rebuilding. "We should be realistic about what this is." "What this is?" She leaned forward, refusing to let him retreat completely. "What is this, Thorn? Because I've been trying to figure it out for over a year and I'm tired of pretending I have the answers." He stood abruptly, moving to the windows that overlooked Central Park. His reflection in the glass looked like a man trapped between two worlds, the one he'd built to protect himself and the one she was offering him. "Our families had expectations," he said finally. "Two successful dynasties joining forces, stability, respectability, a partnership that made sense on paper. And what about us? What about what we want?" "What we want?" Thorn's laugh was bitter. "When did what we want ever matter?" Ingrid rose from her chair, her heart pounding with an unfamiliar courage. "It matters now. It matters to me." "Why?" He turned to face her, and she saw something desperate in his eyes. "Why now? What's changed?" "You," she said simply. "Last night I saw you. Not the businessman, not the perfect husband, not the man our families created. I saw you, and I realized I want to know who that person is." Thorn's hands clenched at his sides. "You don't know what you're asking for? Then tell me." "Tell you what?" "Everything." She took a step closer, noting how his breathing changed. "Why you flinch when I accidentally touch you? Why you sleep in a separate wing? Why you look at me sometimes like you're afraid I might disappear, and other times like you wish I would?" The words hit him like physical blows. She could see him fighting some internal battle, weighing truths against the safety of silence. "Ingrid, please." His voice cracked slightly. "Some things are better left buried." "Are they? Because this half-life we're living isn't working for either of us." She gestured around their perfect dining room, their perfect home, their perfect lie. "Look at us, Thorn. We're two people drowning in the same house, too proud to reach for each other." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you are hurting me." The admission escaped before she could soften it. "Every day you're hurting me. Not with cruelty, but with distance. Not with anger, but with indifference." "It's not indifference." The words burst out of him like a confession. "God, Ingrid, it's not indifference." "Then what is it?" Thorn closed his eyes, his entire body trembling with the effort of holding something back. When he opened them again, she saw years of carefully hidden pain. "It's self-preservation." The honesty in those words broke something open in her chest. She took another step closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to notice the slight tremor in his hands. "From me? From wanting something I can't have? Can't or won't?" "Can't." His voice was firm, final. "There are things about me, complications you don't understand, things that make a real marriage impossible." Ingrid studied his face, seeing past the words to the fear underneath. "Try me." "No." He moved away from her again, putting the dining table between them like a barrier. "Some risks are too great." "For whom? For me? Or for you?" The question seemed to shatter something in him. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white with tension. "For both of us," he said finally. "Some walls exist for good reasons, Ingrid. Some distances are necessary." "Says who?" "Says experience. Says logic." Says every therapist who's ever told me that I'm not built for the kind of intimacy most people take for granted. The admission slipped out before he could stop it, and Ingrid felt pieces of a puzzle she didn't know she was solving suddenly click into place. The careful distances, the formal interactions, the way he seemed to hold his breath whenever she was near. Therapists, she repeated softly. How many therapists, Thorn? He realized his mistake immediately. The mask came slamming back down, but it was too late. She'd seen behind it. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. She moved around the table, and he backed away instinctively. How long have you been carrying this alone? Ingrid, please, let it go. No. Her voice was stronger now, filled with a determination that surprised them both. I'm done letting things go. I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done living like a stranger in my own marriage. This isn't your problem to solve. Maybe not, but you're my husband and your pain is my pain whether you admit it or not. Thorn stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. You don't understand what you're saying. Then help me understand. I can't. Can't or won't. Both. He moved toward the door, retreating from her and from the conversation that was spiraling beyond his control. I need some air. Running away again? The words stopped him cold. He turned back to her, his expression wounded. I'm not running, I'm protecting you. From what? From me, from disappointment, from a marriage that will never be what you deserve. What I deserve? Ingrid's voice rose with frustration. What I deserve is a husband who talks to me. What I deserve is honesty. What I deserve is a chance to make my own choices about what risks I'm willing to take. Thorn stood frozen in the doorway, torn between flight and the woman who was demanding he stay and fight. You think you want the truth, he said quietly, but the truth changes everything. Once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see, you can't unsee. Maybe I don't want to unknow. Maybe I'm tired of seeing only what you let me see. They stared at each other across the elegant dining room. Two people standing at the edge of a precipice, neither was sure they were brave enough to jump from. Finally, Thorn spoke, his voice heavy with resignation and something that might have been hope. Give me time to find the words. How much time? I don't know. Years of silence aren't easily broken. Ingrid nodded, understanding that this was the most he could offer right now. I'll wait, but not forever, Thorn. We can't live like this forever. I know, he whispered. I know. And as he disappeared into the night, Ingrid realized that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is wait for someone to find the courage to let you love them. 3 days passed in careful silence. Ingrid found herself living in the spaces between conversations, watching Thorn like someone studying a puzzle with half the pieces missing. He kept his promise about finding words, but the search seemed to be tearing him apart from the inside. She saw it in the way he stood at the kitchen window each morning, coffee growing cold in his hands as he stared at nothing. She heard it in the piano music that drifted from his hidden room late at night, beautiful, tortured melodies that spoke of battles being fought in the darkness. On Wednesday evening, she made a decision that would have terrified her a week ago. She started writing letters to herself. Dear Ingrid, today I realized I don't know my own husband's favorite color. We've been married for over a year, and I couldn't tell you if he prefers coffee or tea, if he's a morning person, if he has nightmares. I know his net worth, his business schedule, his clothing size for formal events, but I don't know if he's ever been in love. Have I? I thought love was supposed to feel like fireworks and racing hearts and sleepless nights filled with longing, but maybe love is quieter than that. Maybe love is wanting to understand someone's silence as much as their words. Maybe love is being willing to wait in the darkness until someone finds the courage to turn on the light. I think I might love him, the real him, not the version our families created, and that terrifies me more than living as strangers forever. She sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in her nightstand drawer, next to her grandmother's pearls and a bottle of perfume she'd never worn. Something about putting her thoughts on paper made them feel more real, more dangerous. Thursday brought an unexpected moment of connection. Ingrid was in the library, a room they'd furnished but never used, when Thorn appeared in the doorway. He looked like a man gathering courage for battle. May I? He gestured toward the chair across from her reading nook. Of course. He sat carefully, maintaining his usual distance but making an effort to be present. Ingrid closed her book, a biography of Clara Schumann she'd picked up after their conversation about music, and waited. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, about deserving honesty. Her heart began to race, but she kept her expression calm. And there are things about me that aren't typical. He chose each word carefully, like someone walking through a minefield. Conditions that make normal relationships challenging. Define normal. The question seemed to surprise him. Physical intimacy, casual touch, the things most married couples take for granted. Why? Thorne's hands gripped the arms of his chair. When I was 15, I had what doctors call a neurological episode, a reaction to stress that manifested in unusual ways. Hypersensitivity to touch, sound, crowded spaces. It took years of therapy to learn coping mechanisms. Ingrid absorbed this carefully, understanding that each word was costing him something. And now I function well in controlled environments. Business meetings, formal events, situations where the rules are clear and the physical contact is minimal. He paused. But intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability triggers the same responses I've spent decades learning to manage. So, when you avoid touching me, I'm not rejecting you. I'm protecting both of us from the panic attacks that follow when my nervous system becomes overwhelmed. The confession hung between them like a bridge made of glass, beautiful and fragile and requiring careful navigation. Thank you, Ingrid said softly, for trusting me with that. There's more. His voice was barely audible. But that's all I can manage today. That's enough, that's more than enough. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had just taken the first real step toward understanding each other. When Thorne finally stood to leave, he paused at her chair. Ingrid? Yes? What you're reading? Clara Schumann. She was married to a composer. Robert Schumann. I know. Their love story was complicated. He struggled with mental illness. She had to choose between her own career and caring for him. Thorne's voice carried a weight of meaning. She chose love, but it cost her everything she'd worked for. Before Ingrid could respond, he was gone, leaving her with a biography that suddenly felt like a warning. That night she wrote another letter. Dear Ingrid, he told me today. Not everything, but enough to understand why he builds walls around himself. He's not cold, he's scared. He's not rejecting me. He's protecting both of us from something he can't control. The question now is, what am I willing to risk for love? Am I strong enough to love someone who might never be able to love me back the way I need? Am I prepared to be Clara Schumann, choosing love over everything else? I don't know. But I know I'm tired of living half a life with half a marriage to half a person. I want all of him. The brilliant businessman, the secret musician, the broken boy who learned to fear his own nervous system. I want his panic attacks and his coping mechanisms and his late-night piano sessions. I want his truth, even if it's ugly, especially if it's ugly. Because perfect love isn't about perfect people. It's about imperfect people choosing each other anyway. Friday evening brought the sound she'd been waiting for. Piano music drifting from his hidden room. This time she didn't hesitate. She walked directly to the music room and knocked softly on the open door. You said I could listen, she reminded him. Thorne looked up from the keys, his face unguarded in the lamplight. I did. May I come in? He nodded, though she could see the effort it cost him. Ingrid entered slowly, choosing a chair near the window, close enough to hear every note, far enough away to give him space. What would you like to hear? He asked. Whatever you need to play. Thorne's fingers found the keys, and the room filled with something she'd never heard before. Not a classical piece, but an improvisation that seemed to pour directly from his soul. It was beautiful and broken and hopeful all at once, like a conversation between his head and his heart. As the music swirled around them, Ingrid closed her eyes and let herself really listen, not just to the notes, but to the story they told. A story of loneliness and longing, of walls built for protection and the desperate desire for someone to see past them. When the last note faded, they sat in perfect silence. That was beautiful, she whispered. That was goodbye, he said quietly. Goodbye to what? To the hope that this could work. And with those words, Ingrid realized that sometimes the most dangerous moment in any relationship isn't when someone stops fighting for it. It's when they're about to give up. No. The word escaped Ingrid's lips before she could stop it, cutting through the silence like a blade. Thorne's hands stilled on the piano keys. Ingrid, no, she repeated, standing from her chair with a determination that surprised them both. You don't get to make that decision for me. You don't understand what you're saying, don't I? She moved closer, noting how his shoulders tensed with each step. You think I'm some fragile flower who can't handle your truth. You think I'm so weak that knowing about your condition will send me running. It's not about weakness. Thorne's voice was strained. It's about reality, about what I can and can't offer you, what you can't offer me. Ingrid stopped just out of arm's reach, close enough to see the pain etched in every line of his face. "Thorn, look at me. Really look at me." He lifted his eyes reluctantly, and she saw the war being fought behind them. "For over a year I've lived in this beautiful prison we call a marriage. I've smiled for cameras, played the perfect wife, attended 1,000 events where we performed intimacy without ever actually touching. I've been dying by degrees, and you know what the worst part was? Ingrid, please. The worst part was thinking you didn't want me, thinking I was so fundamentally unlovable that my own husband couldn't bear to be near me." Her voice cracked, but she pushed forward. "Now you're telling me it was never about me at all, that you were protecting me from something I never asked to be protected from." Thorn stood abruptly, putting the piano bench between them. "You don't know what you're asking for? Then show me." "Show you what? What happens when your control slips? What happens during a panic attack? What happens when someone tries to love you the way you're afraid of being loved?" The suggestion terrified him. She could see it in the way his breathing changed, the way his hands trembled slightly. "That's not fair to either of us. Neither is this half-life we're living." Ingrid's voice softened, but her resolve remained firm. "Thorn, I've been writing letters to myself, trying to understand what I want, what I'm willing to fight for. Letters. About you. About us. About the choice I have to make." She took a breath that felt like diving off a cliff. "I choose you, not the perfect version our families wanted, not the businessman who never makes mistakes. I choose the man who plays piano at midnight and builds walls to protect the people he loves. You can't choose what you don't fully understand. Then help me understand. All of it. The panic attacks, the therapy, the years of learning to function in a world that feels too loud, too close, too much." She stepped closer again, and this time he didn't retreat. "Help me understand so I can choose with my eyes wide open." Thorn stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for something, doubt perhaps, or fear, that would give him permission to retreat back into his safe distance. Instead, he found unwavering determination. "It's not romantic," he said finally. "It's not beautiful or poetic. It's messy and complicated and sometimes ugly. I don't need romantic. I need real." When I was 15, I had my first major episode during a school dance. Too many people, too much noise, too much everything. My nervous system essentially short-circuited. His voice was clinical, detached, as if he were discussing someone else's medical history. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't tolerate any physical contact without feeling like my skin was on fire. Ingrid listened without interruption, understanding that each word was costing him something precious. The doctors called it sensory processing disorder, with anxiety complications. Years of therapy taught me to manage it, to function in controlled environments. But intimacy, real intimacy, requires letting someone into your personal space, letting them touch you when your defenses are down. And that triggers the episodes? Not always, but often enough that I learned it was safer to avoid the situation entirely. He sat back down at the piano bench, his hands resting on his thighs. "I can handle business handshakes, formal social contact, the kind of touch that has clear boundaries and expectations. But when someone touches me with affection, with desire, with love, what happens?" Thorn was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I disappear. My mind goes somewhere else, somewhere safe, and I can't find my way back. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. I become a shell of a person, present but not really there." The confession hung between them like a fragile glass ornament, beautiful and devastating, and requiring the most careful handling. "How long since your last episode?" 3 months ago. At the Henderson Gala, when you brushed against my arm during the photographs, I managed to hold it together until we got home, then spent the rest of the night locked in my study, trying to remember how to breathe normally. Ingrid remembered that night, how he'd disappeared immediately after they arrived home, how she'd assumed he was avoiding her out of boredom or distaste. The reality was so much more complex, so much more painful. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought if you knew how broken I was, you'd ask for an annulment." His voice cracked slightly. "Because I was falling in love with you, and I knew love would only make everything worse." The words hit her like lightning, sudden, illuminating, transformative. "You're in love with me?" Thorn looked up at her then, his mask completely gone, his heart written across his face in lines of longing and terror. Desperately, completely, hopelessly, he laughed bitterly. "Which is exactly why this has to end. Love makes the episodes worse, not better. The more I care about you, the more my body rebels against the very thought of letting you close. Ingrid felt tears she didn't know she'd been holding back begin to fall. Not tears of sadness, but of relief, of recognition, of a truth so profound it rearranged everything she thought she knew about their marriage. "You beautiful, impossible man," she whispered. "Don't you see? You're not broken, you're just careful. And maybe careful is exactly what I need." "Ingrid, no, listen to me." She knelt beside the piano bench, close enough to feel his warmth, but careful not to touch him. "I don't need passionate, reckless, overwhelming love. I've had that and it burned out like a match. What I need is someone who sees love as something precious enough to protect. Someone who understands that intimacy isn't about taking what you want. It's about offering what you can." Thorne stared at her as if she were speaking in a foreign language. "You're saying you'd be content with a marriage where physical intimacy might always be complicated, where I might never be able to love you the way other husbands love their wives. I'm saying I'd rather have your complicated love than anyone else's simple love. I'm saying maybe we can figure out our own way of being intimate. Maybe love isn't about following everyone else's rules." For the first time since she'd known him, Thorne reached out and touched her face, just his fingertips against her cheek, light as butterfly wings and twice as precious. "You might be the bravest person I've ever met," he whispered, "or the most foolish, maybe both." And as his fingers traced the line of her jaw with infinite gentleness, Ingrid realized that sometimes the most profound intimacy comes not from what two people take from each other, but from what they're willing to give. The morning after truth has a different quality of light. Ingrid woke to the sound of coffee brewing downstairs, a familiar ritual that somehow felt completely new. Everything looked the same in their pristine bedroom, but she felt fundamentally changed, as if she'd been holding her breath for 14 months and could finally exhale. When she entered the kitchen, Thorne was already there, standing by the window with his usual cup of black coffee. But his posture was different, less rigid, more present. When he turned to greet her, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Hope. "Good morning," he said softly, and the words carried weight they'd never held before. "Good morning." She moved to the coffee maker, hyper-aware of his presence in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. "How did you sleep?" "I didn't." His honesty surprised them both. "I kept thinking about what you said, about choosing complicated love." Ingrid poured her coffee with steady hands, though her heart was racing. "Any regrets? About telling you the truth?" "No." He paused, studying her face. "About what happens next? Everything terrifies me." "Good," she said, surprising him. "Terror means it matters." They stood in their kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd shared countless silent breakfasts, but the space between them felt charged with possibility instead of emptiness. "I want to try something," Ingrid said carefully. "If you're willing." Thorne's entire body tensed. "What kind of something?" "Nothing dramatic, just sitting together, actually together, on the same couch, reading, existing in the same space without the careful choreography." She could see him processing the request, weighing the risk against the potential reward. "What if I have an episode? Then we'll figure it out together." Her voice was calm, certain. "I'm not going anywhere, Thorne. Not because you panic, not because love is harder than we thought it would be. I'm staying." The words seemed to physically impact him. He set down his coffee cup with trembling hands. "You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow too. And next week. And next month." She stepped closer, noting how his breathing changed. "The only way you'll get rid of me is if you ask me to leave. And even then, I might argue." For the first time since she'd known him, Thorne smiled. Not the practiced smile he wore for cameras, but something real and startled and beautiful. "You're serious about this?" "Deadly serious." That afternoon, they attempted their first experiment in intentional proximity. Ingrid had chosen the library, neutral territory with comfortable seating and natural lighting. She settled into one corner of the large sectional sofa with a book about art history, leaving plenty of space for Thorne to choose his own level of comfort. He appeared in the doorway, looking like a man preparing for surgery. "You can change your mind," she said without looking up from her book. "This isn't a test, isn't it?" "No, it's just two people sharing a room. Nothing more, nothing less." Thorne entered slowly, carrying a business journal and what looked like financial reports. He chose the opposite end of the sofa, as far from her as possible while still technically sharing the same piece of furniture. For the first hour, they read in silence. Ingrid could feel his hyper-awareness, the way he monitored every sound, every movement, every shift in the air between them. But gradually she noticed his breathing beginning to slow, his shoulders starting to relax. "What are you reading?" she asked, during what felt like a safe moment. "Quarterly earnings reports for the telecommunications sector." He glanced at her book. "More interesting than art history, I'm sure." "Are you joking?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, followed immediately by laughter she couldn't contain. The sound seemed to surprise him. "What's funny?" "You. Making actual jokes. I didn't know you had a sense of humor." "I don't, generally. It's highly impractical for business, but not for marriage." Thorne considered this seriously. "I suppose marriage might require different skills than I originally anticipated." They returned to their reading, but something had shifted. The silence felt companionable instead of tense, shared instead of parallel. 2 hours later, when Ingrid's book slipped from her relaxed fingers and she dozed in the afternoon sunlight, Thorne found himself actually looking at her, not the careful, measured glances he usually allowed himself, but real observation. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the elegant perfection she showed the world. Her hair had escaped its morning style, falling in soft waves around her face. Her mouth was slightly open, her breathing deep and even. She looked peaceful, unguarded, real. Without thinking, he found himself moving closer. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to see the faint freckles across her nose, close enough to notice the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks. When Ingrid stirred awake 20 minutes later, the first thing she saw was Thorne watching her with an expression she couldn't quite identify. "Hi," she said softly, not moving from her position. "Hi." His voice was rougher than usual. "You fell asleep." "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize. You looked peaceful." They stared at each other across the small distance that separated them, both aware that something significant had happened. He had chosen to move closer instead of maintaining maximum distance. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable in his presence. "Thorne?" "Yes?" "When you were watching me sleep, how did it feel? Physically, I mean." He was quiet for a long moment, taking inventory of his body, his breathing, his nervous system. "Calm," he said finally, surprise evident in his voice. "For the first time in months, completely calm." "Good," she whispered. "That's very good." That evening they shared another home-cooked meal. This time Thorne helped, not cooking, which he freely admitted was beyond his capabilities, but setting the table, opening wine, asking questions about her day that went beyond polite small talk. "Can I ask you something?" Ingrid said as they finished their dinner. "Anything. The panic attacks, are they always triggered by touch, or are there other things?" Thorne set down his fork, considering how much truth she could handle. "Crowds, unexpected loud noises, being touched without warning, but also," he paused, "emotional vulnerability. The more I care about something, the more my body rebels against the risk of losing it. So falling in love made everything worse. Exponentially worse. The more I wanted to be close to you, the more my nervous system interpreted that desire as a threat." Ingrid absorbed this, understanding the cruel irony of his condition. "What about now, sitting here talking about it? How does this feel?" Thorne took a moment to assess honestly. "Terrifying, but also right. Like maybe my body is finally catching up to what my heart has known for months." "Which is?" "That you're safe. That choosing to trust you isn't the same as losing control." After dinner, they returned to the music room. This time, when Thorne sat at the piano, Ingrid chose a chair closer to the bench. Not close enough to crowd him, but close enough to feel truly included in the experience. "Play something happy," she requested. "I don't know much happy music." "Then, play something hopeful." Thorne's fingers found the keys, and the room filled with something she'd never heard from him before. Music that spoke of new beginnings, of walls coming down, of two people learning to breathe in the same space. As the final notes faded, Ingrid realized that happiness wasn't about dramatic gestures or passionate declarations. Sometimes happiness was as simple as sitting close enough to hear someone's breathing, as revolutionary as choosing trust over fear. And sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from perfect technique, but from the courage to play your heart when someone is finally ready to listen. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored and elegant, demanding their presence at the annual Pemberton Foundation Gala in 3 days. Ingrid found Thorne in his study, staring at the invitation as if it were a threat instead of a social obligation. "We don't have to go," she said from the doorway. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "It's the most important social event of the season. Both our families will expect. I don't care what they expect." She entered the room, noting how his posture had shifted back into defensive mode. 3 days ago you told me the truth about your condition. This is our first real test, isn't it? Thorne's silence was answer enough. The Pemberton Gala was everything their usual events were, but magnified. 500 guests, live orchestra, dancing, photographers, and hours of the kind of social performance that would require them to maintain their facade of perfect intimacy while navigating crowds that could trigger his episodes. We could say you're ill, Ingrid suggested, or that I am. And then what? We hide forever. We never attend another public event because I can't handle being touched by my own wife. The bitterness in his voice caught her off guard. She realized that for all his progress, Thorne was still fighting a war against himself. That's not what I meant, isn't it? He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. You say you accept my limitations, but the reality is that those limitations will define our entire life. No normal social interactions, no spontaneous affection, no— Stop! The command in her voice made him turn. You're spiraling. I'm being realistic. You're panicking. She moved closer, reading the signs she was learning to recognize, the rapid breathing, the clenched hands, the way he seemed to be retreating into himself. Thorne, look at me. He did, and she saw the fear beneath his anger. The gala doesn't matter. The photographers don't matter. What matters is whether you trust me enough to try. Trust you to do what? To be your partner, really your partner. Not just in private moments when it's safe, but in public when it's hard. Thorne stared at her for a long moment, and she could practically see him weighing the risks. What are you suggesting? That we go, together. And if you need space, I'll create it. If you need to leave, we'll leave. If you have an episode— She paused, choosing her words carefully. Then we'll handle it together. You don't understand what you're offering. If I have a panic attack at the Pemberton Gala, it won't be private. There will be witnesses, photographers, gossip that could destroy both our reputations. Then we'll handle that too. The simplicity of her response seemed to shatter something in him. He sat heavily in his desk chair, running his hands through his hair. Why are you willing to risk that? Because hiding isn't living, and I want to live with you, not hide from the world with you. That evening, they began preparing, not just with wardrobe selections and schedule coordination, but with strategy. Tell me what helps, Ingrid said as they sat in the library. During an episode, what brings you back? Thorne looked uncomfortable discussing it, but answered honestly. Breathing exercises, focusing on something specific, counting, naming objects in the room, sometimes music, and space. I need physical space to reset. What makes it worse? Being touched when I'm already overstimulated, crowds pressing too close, loud, unexpected noises. He paused. People trying to help when they don't understand what's happening. Okay, so if we go and you start feeling overwhelmed, you'll signal me. How? Signal you? We need a code. Something subtle that tells me you need space or need to leave. Thorne considered this. I could touch your arm, just briefly. Perfect. And if you touch my arm, I'll create distance between us and other people. If you touch my arm twice, we leave immediately. No questions asked. The fact that she was planning for his limitations, rather than hoping they wouldn't manifest, seemed to calm something in him. You've thought about this. I've thought about everything, including what I'll tell people if they ask why my husband suddenly needs space. What will you tell them? That you're brilliant, successful, and occasionally need a moment to process business calls, or that you have a headache, or that I'm clingy and you're giving me a gentle reminder about personal space. She smiled. Rich people love gossip about other rich people's minor marital quirks. Despite everything, Thorne almost smiled. You'd lie for me. I'd protect you. There's a difference. The night of the gala arrived with unseasonable rain, which somehow felt appropriate. Ingrid had chosen her dress carefully, elegant but not attention-grabbing, with sleeves that would allow her to feel Thorne's signal clearly. She watched him dress with the precision of a soldier preparing for battle, each piece of his formal wear like armor against the world. You look beautiful, he said, as they prepared to leave, and she heard the gratitude beneath the compliment. You look terrified. I am terrified. Good. That means you're brave. The ride to the Pemberton Foundation was silent, except for the rain against the car windows. Ingrid could feel Thorne's tension radiating from his side of the back seat, but she didn't try to reassure him with empty words. Instead, she simply sat with him in his fear. The gala was everything they'd expected, glittering, loud, crowded, and relentlessly social. The moment they stepped through the doors, cameras flashed and voices called their names. Ingrid felt Thorne stiffen beside her, but he managed their entrance with his usual composure. For the first hour, Everything went smoothly. They moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries with business associates and family friends. Thorne maintained his careful distances, and Ingrid provided subtle buffers between him and overly enthusiastic acquaintances. Then Mrs. Henderson appeared, as she always did, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue. "Darling couple," she exclaimed, swooping toward them with arms extended for embraces. "You both look absolutely radiant tonight." Ingrid saw Thorne's face go pale a split second before Mrs. Henderson's arms closed around him in an enthusiastic hug. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Thorne's entire body went rigid, his breathing stopped, and his eyes took on the distant, glassy quality she'd never seen before, but now recognized from his descriptions. He was there, but not there, present, but unreachable. Mrs. Henderson, oblivious to his distress, continued chattering while still holding him. "You must tell me about your plans for the holidays. Are you spending them with Thorne's family or yours?" Ingrid's mind went into overdrive. She could see photographers nearby, could hear other conversations slowing as people began to notice something was wrong. In that moment, she made a choice that would define everything that came after. "Mrs. Henderson," she said with perfect social grace, stepping forward and gently but firmly placing her hand on the woman's arm. "I'm so sorry, but Thorne just received an urgent business call before we arrived. Would you mind terribly if I borrowed him for just a moment?" She guided Mrs. Henderson's arms away from Thorne without making it seem like rejection, then smoothly positioned herself between her husband and the rest of the room. "Darling," she said to Thorne, her voice carrying just enough volume for nearby listeners, "didn't you say you needed to return that call about the Tokyo merger?" Thorne's eyes focused on her face, and she saw recognition flicker there. Not full awareness, but enough to follow her lead. "Yes," he managed, his voice carefully controlled. "Excuse us." Ingrid guided him through the crowd toward the exit, smiling and nodding at acquaintances while creating a protective bubble around them both. When someone tried to stop them for conversation, she deflected with perfect politeness and kept moving. They made it to their car just as Thorne's careful control finally cracked. But as she held him in the privacy of their back seat while he remembered how to breathe, Ingrid realized that love isn't about never falling. It's about who catches you when you do. The silence in their car was broken only by the rhythm of rain against windows and Thorne's labored breathing. Ingrid sat perfectly still beside him, her hand resting on the seat between them, close enough to offer comfort, far enough away to give him space. She'd learned that after an episode, touch could feel like fire against his skin, so she waited. "I'm sorry," he whispered finally, his voice raw and broken. "For what? For proving that you were wrong about us. About this." He gestured vaguely between them. "For you said we could handle anything together, and I couldn't even manage a simple social interaction." Ingrid turned to face him fully, her heart breaking at the defeat in his voice. "Thorne, look at me." He lifted his eyes reluctantly, and she saw shame there that cut her deeper than any physical pain ever could. "You didn't fail tonight. The world failed you. Mrs. Henderson failed you by not respecting boundaries. Society failed you by creating situations where people feel entitled to your body without permission." Her voice was fierce, protective. "But you didn't fail me. I had a panic attack in front of 200 people. No, you had a panic attack in front of me, and I handled it. We handled it." Thorne stared at her as if she were speaking in a foreign language. "You're not angry? Embarrassed? Disappointed?" "I'm proud. Proud. You stayed conscious. You followed my lead when I created an exit strategy. You trusted me to get you out safely, instead of trying to fight through it alone." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That took more courage than most people will ever understand." Something in her voice seemed to reach him through the fog of his self-recrimination. His breathing began to slow, his shoulders starting to unclench. "What happens tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "Tomorrow? When the gossip starts. When people ask questions about why we left early, why I looked—" He struggled for words. "When they realize something's wrong with me." "Nothing's wrong with you," Ingrid said firmly. "You have a neurological condition that you manage beautifully 99% of the time. Tonight was the 1%. Tomorrow we move forward." When they arrived home, Thorne disappeared immediately into his study. Ingrid didn't follow. She understood that he needed time to process, to rebuild the walls that had crumbled in public. Instead, she made tea and waited. An hour later, she found him at his desk, staring at his laptop screen with an expression that made her stomach clench. "What is it?" "The early society blog posts are already up. His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the pain underneath. About our mysterious early departure and my concerning behavior. Ingrid moved around the desk to read over his shoulder, noting how he didn't flinch away from her proximity the way he usually did after an episode. The blog posts were everything they'd feared. Speculation about marital problems, business troubles, health issues, photos of them leaving early, captions wondering if Manhattan's golden couple was facing difficulties. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Thorne said quietly. "No," Ingrid said, surprising him. "This is better than what you were afraid of." "How is this better?" "Because look at these photos." She pointed to the images on the screen. "Really look at them." Thorne studied the pictures, him pale and shaken, her hand protectively on his arm as she guided him away from the crowd. "What am I supposed to see? A woman who loves her husband, a man who trusts his wife, two people taking care of each other." She straightened, decision crystallizing in her mind. "These aren't photos of a marriage in crisis. These are photos of a partnership." Before Thorne could respond, Ingrid was already moving toward the door. "Where are you going?" "To fix this." "Ingrid, wait." But she was already gone, leaving him staring after her with a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. 20 minutes later, Ingrid sat in their library with her laptop open and her phone beside her. She'd made 3 calls. To her publicist, her closest friend who happened to be a lifestyle blogger, and the editor of Manhattan Social, the city's most influential society magazine. Now she was crafting something that would either save their reputation or destroy it completely. When Thorne found her an hour later, she was proofreading what looked like a very official statement. "What did you do?" he asked, though his tone held more curiosity than accusation. "I told the truth. A version of it, anyway." She turned the laptop so he could read her work. A statement from Mrs. Ingrid Whittaker. "My husband and I left last night's Pemberton Foundation gala early due to a medical situation that Thorne has been managing privately for many years. While we typically prefer to keep personal matters private, the speculation surrounding our departure has made a brief clarification necessary. Thorne lives with a neurological condition that occasionally requires him to step away from overwhelming environments. This is not a crisis, not a scandal, and certainly not a reflection of any problems in our marriage. It is simply a reality that we navigate together with grace, understanding, and love. To those who have reached out with concern, we appreciate your care. To those who have chosen to speculate rather than support, we hope you might consider the impact of your words on families dealing with invisible disabilities. We look forward to continuing our work with the various foundations and organizations we support, and we thank you for respecting our privacy as we manage this together. With gratitude, Ingrid Whittaker Thorne read the statement 3 times before speaking. "You're going to publish this?" "I already have. It'll be in tomorrow's Manhattan Social, and my friend is posting a supportive piece on her blog tonight." Ingrid watched his face carefully. "I know I should have asked your permission first, but you're defending me. I'm defending us. To the entire city. To anyone who will listen." Thorne sat heavily in the chair across from her, processing the implications. "You realize this changes everything? Once this is public, there's no going back to pretending everything is normal." "Good," Ingrid said simply. Normal was killing us both. They sat in silence while the weight of her decision settled between them. Finally, Thorne spoke. "What if people don't accept it? What if this makes things worse? Then we'll handle that too, together." She closed the laptop and looked at him directly. "Thorne, I'm tired of living in fear of what people might think. I'm tired of protecting a reputation built on lies. I want to build something real with you, even if it's messy and complicated and sometimes public. You could lose everything. Your social standing, your family's approval, I could lose you," she interrupted, "and that's the only loss I can't survive." The words hung between them like a bridge made of hope and terror in equal measure. "You mean that?" "I mean that." Thorne stood slowly, moving to the window where he could see the city lights spreading below them like a vast constellation of judgment and possibility. "I never asked you to sacrifice anything for me. You didn't have to ask. That's what love is, choosing someone even when it costs you something." When he turned back to her, his face was transformed. The careful mask was gone, replaced by something raw and grateful and achingly vulnerable. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you saved me tonight, not because you're defending me tomorrow, but because you see me, all of me, and you're still here." "I love you too," she whispered, panic attacks and all. For the first time since their wedding, they moved toward each other without hesitation. When Thorne reached for her hands, his touch was steady, sure, unafraid. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we find out what it means to really be married." And as they stood together in their library, hands intertwined and hearts finally open, they realized that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is stop hiding and start living. 3 weeks after Ingrid's statement changed everything, the world had not ended. It had, however, fundamentally shifted. The responses to her public declaration had been swift and varied. Some society blogs applauded her honesty and vulnerability. Others criticized her for airing private matters publicly. Several disability advocacy organizations reached out with support and gratitude. A few business associates distanced themselves, while others expressed admiration for their transparency. But none of that mattered tonight. Tonight, Ingrid couldn't sleep, and for the first time in their marriage, it wasn't because of loneliness. She made her way downstairs to the kitchen, the same path she'd taken that first night when everything began to change. But now, instead of seeking solitude, she was hoping to find him. And there he was. Thorne sat at their kitchen island, not hiding in shadows, but simply existing in their shared space. He wore a simple t-shirt and pajama pants, clothing she'd never seen him in before their walls came down. His hair was messed from sleep and he looked wonderfully, imperfectly human. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He looked up, and his smile was immediate, unguarded. "Too much thinking." "Good thinking or bad thinking?" "Terrifying thinking." He patted the stool beside him. "Want to be terrified together?" Ingrid sat beside him, actually beside him, close enough that their knees almost touched, and marveled at how natural it felt. "What's terrifying you at midnight, Mr. Whitaker?" "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, and the way he said her name made her heart skip. "I've been thinking about what happens next." Next. We've told the world we're real. We've admitted we love each other. We've survived the gossip and the judgment and the social fallout. He turned to face her fully. But we've never talked about what we actually want our marriage to look like. The question hung between them, weighted with a year of pretending and 3 weeks of truth-telling. "What do you want it to look like?" she asked quietly. Thorne was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to wake up in the same bed as you. Not every night. I still need space sometimes, but most nights. I want to know what you dream about, what you think about when you're quiet, what makes you laugh until you can't breathe." His honesty was devastating and beautiful. "I want to cook terrible meals together and argue about whether the thermostat should be set to 70 or 72. I want to learn how to touch you in ways that feel good instead of overwhelming. I want—" He paused, struggling with words. "I want to figure out how to be intimate in all the ways that matter. Physical intimacy? That too, eventually. But more than that." He reached for her hand, his touch steady and sure. "I want emotional intimacy. I want to tell you about the nightmares I had as a teenager, about the therapy that saved my life, about why music became my refuge. I want to know about your dreams, your fears, your secret hopes." Ingrid felt tears gathering in her eyes. "And if the physical part is always complicated, then we'll be complicated together. There are hundreds of ways to be intimate, Ingrid. We'll find the ones that work for us." She studied his face in the soft kitchen lighting, seeing the man she'd fallen in love with, not despite his complications, but because of his courage in facing them. "What if I want more than you can give? Then we'll talk about it. We'll figure it out. We'll go to therapy together if we need to." His voice was firm, certain. "But I'm done assuming what you need instead of asking. I'm done protecting you from choices that should be yours to make." The growth in him, the willingness to be vulnerable, the commitment to their partnership, it took her breath away. "Thorne?" "Yes? I want all of that too. The terrible cooking, the thermostat arguments, the complicated intimacy." She paused, gathering courage for what she needed to say next. "But I want something else too." "What?" "I want to see you play piano when you're happy, not just when you're sad. I want to learn the songs that make you smile. I want to understand the music you hear in your head when you look at me." "You want to learn music?" "I want to learn you, all of you. The businessman, the musician, the man who counts ceiling tiles during panic attacks, the person who's been hiding behind perfect composure for so long he forgot what it felt like to just be." Thorne's eyes filled with something that looked like wonder. "You really see me. I really see you." They sat in their kitchen as the city slept around them, two people who had spent over a year as strangers finally becoming partners. "Can I try something?" Thorne asked suddenly. "What kind of something?" "The kind that might end badly, but might also be beautiful." Ingrid's heart raced, but she nodded. Thorne stood slowly, extending his hand to her. "Dance with me. There's no music. There's always music. Sometimes you just have to listen harder. She took his hand and let him lead her to the center of their kitchen. He positioned them carefully, close enough to feel connected, far enough apart that he could breathe. His left hand held hers gently. His right hand rested lightly on her waist, barely touching. They swayed together in silence, and Ingrid realized he was right. There was music in their synchronized breathing, in the rhythm of their hearts, in the whispered sound of bare feet on marble. "How does this feel?" she whispered. "Like coming home," he said simply. They danced without moving much, swaying in the soft light of their kitchen, while the grandfather clock marked the passing minutes. It wasn't the passionate, desperate dance of movie romances. It was something quieter, deeper, the dance of two people learning to exist in the same space without fear. "Ingrid? Thank you. For what? For choosing me, for fighting for us, for seeing complicated love as something worth having instead of something to fix." She looked up at him, this man who had learned to trust her with his vulnerabilities, who had chosen courage over comfort, who was still learning how to love and be loved. "Thank you for letting me choose you." As the clock chimed 1 in the morning, they continued their gentle dance in the kitchen where their story had begun. And for the first time since their wedding day, they both knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. "Thorn? Yes? I think we're going to be okay." "Better than okay," he whispered against her hair. "I think we're going to be extraordinary." And as they swayed together in the quiet darkness, two people who had married as strangers finally became what they'd always been meant to be, partners in the truest sense of the word. 2 years later, the sound of laughter drifted from the kitchen on a Sunday morning in October. Ingrid stood in the doorway of their music room, watching Thorn at the piano with their 6-month-old daughter, Melody, nestled carefully in his lap. His hands moved across the keys with practiced gentleness, playing a simplified version of Clair de Lune, while she gurgled contentedly against his chest. "She has your hands," Ingrid said softly, not wanting to break the spell. Thorn looked up, his face lighting up with the unguarded smile that had become her favorite sight in the world. "She has your fearlessness. Watch this." He played a sudden, playful chord change, and instead of startling, baby Melody clapped her tiny hands together and laughed, a sound so pure it made Ingrid's heart ache with happiness. "See? No fear of unexpected changes. She gets that from you." Ingrid entered the room and settled into her usual chair, the one she'd chosen that first night, now worn comfortable from 2 years of shared musical evenings. The space that had once been Thorn's hidden refuge had become their family sanctuary. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, the question that had become part of their daily rhythm. "Good. Calm." He adjusted his hold on Melody, who was now trying to grab the piano keys. "Yesterday's board meeting was intense, but I came home to you two and everything else just faded." Recovery hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks, difficult days, moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, but they'd learned to navigate together, through couples therapy, through honest conversations, through the simple act of choosing each other every single day. "I have news," Ingrid said, pulling an envelope from her robe pocket. "Good news or concerning news?" "Wonderful news. The Neurological Research Foundation wants to feature our story in their awareness campaign, not as a tragedy to overcome, but as an example of how relationships can thrive when people understand and accommodate each other's needs." Thorn considered this, his fingers still moving softly across the keys. 2 years ago, the thought of being publicly vulnerable would have terrified him. Now he understood the power of their story. What would it involve? An interview, maybe some photos, nothing invasive. They want to show that love doesn't have to look the same for everyone to be real. "And you want to do it?" "I want to do whatever feels right to you. This is your story too." Melody chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal and bang both tiny fists on the piano keys, creating a cacophony that made them both laugh. "I think that's a yes from our daughter," Thorn said, kissing the top of the baby's head. "And yes from me too. If our story can help other couples understand that different doesn't mean broken, then it's worth sharing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their daughter explore the piano keys, with the fearless curiosity of someone who had never been taught that making noise was wrong. "Do you ever miss it?" Thorn asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The perfect life. The one where everything looked easy and beautiful and uncomplicated." Ingrid considered the question seriously. The woman she'd been 2 years ago had lived in a pristine apartment with a husband who never disturbed her peace. She'd attended flawless events, maintained perfect composure, and never had to worry about panic attacks or sensory overload, or the beautiful chaos of loving someone deeply imperfect. "Not for a second," she said finally. "That wasn't living. That was performing. Even when things get difficult, when I have bad days, when the noise gets too much, when I need more space than most husbands. Especially then, because those difficult moments are when I remember how much courage it takes for you to love me, how much trust you place in me every day, how much strength it requires to be vulnerable." Melody had fallen asleep against Thorne's chest, her tiny fist clutching his shirt. He looked down at her with an expression of such profound tenderness that it took Ingrid's breath away. "I never thought I'd have this," he whispered. "A family, someone who could love me without trying to fix me, a child who will grow up thinking her father's differences are just part of who he is. She'll be stronger because of it. She'll understand that everyone has different needs, different ways of moving through the world. She'll be more compassionate, more accepting, more like her mother, more like both her parents." As the afternoon sun streamed through their music room windows, Ingrid reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from strangers bound by obligation to partners bound by choice, from a marriage built on appearances to a love built on acceptance. It hadn't been the love story she'd imagined as a young woman, all passion and grand gestures and dramatic declarations. Instead, it had been something quieter and deeper, the love story of two people learning to see each other clearly and choosing to stay anyway. "Thorne? Play something happy." His fingers found the keys, and the room filled with something bright and hopeful, a melody that spoke of new beginnings, of walls that had become windows, of two people who had found their rhythm in a world that often moved too fast and too loud. As the music surrounded them, Ingrid closed her eyes and listened to the symphony of their life. Piano notes and baby breathing, the settling sounds of their home, the quiet confidence of two people who had learned that the most beautiful music isn't always the loudest. When she opened her eyes, Thorne was watching her with the same wonder he'd shown that first night in the kitchen when she'd refused to let him say goodbye to hope. "I love you," he said simply, the words as natural now as breathing. "I love you too," she replied, meaning it more than she had ever meant anything. Outside their windows, New York City hummed with 8 million stories of people searching for connection, for understanding, for love that sees them as they truly are. But inside their music room, surrounded by the gentle chaos of family life, Ingrid and Thorne had found something rare and precious, a love that didn't need to be perfect to be extraordinary. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories aren't about people who never struggle. They're about people who struggle together, who choose each other not despite their complications, but because of their courage in facing them. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a marriage that begins as a contract can become a love story that changes everything you thought you knew about what it means to come home. The end. What did you think about Ingrid and Thorne's journey? Have you ever had to redefine what love looks like in your own life? What does it mean to you to truly see and accept someone as they are? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.